Hi. I want to talk about Jackson. I want to have a preliminary discussion about Jackson with you. I say a preliminary discussion because Jackson is a complicated subject, and I want to give you plenty of time for you to be familiar with the writing in Hofstadter in particular. Shut that book. For now, you ought to have been familiar with the essay in the Oates book by Mazelak on Jackson, but we need to get some preliminary ideas out of the way before we can entertain this subject. So let's begin. Today, let's go. Let's begin with some introductory ideas about Andrew Jackson. Okay? Introductory ideas. Okay? Hi. How you doing? First of all, I want to talk about political parties from about 1815 to 1828. Political parties, 1815 to 1828, as a preliminary to talking about Jackson with you. Shut all that stuff off. Point number one. Point number one. By about 1815, we can say that the Federalist Party was all but dead. By about 1815, the Federalist Party was all but dead. And why wouldn't it be dead? Why wouldn't it be dead, since the Federalist Party tended to be a rather elitist institution? Write that down. The Federalist Party tended to be a rather elitist institution that was focused on the problems associated with wealthy people. It was very much fixated with how wealthy people were going to maintain authority in the United States. The Federalist Party was a party that was very much fixated with the idea that wealthy people ought to have a predominant role in running the United States. That idea of the wealthy people having this greater share of say was simply not viable. Why wasn't it viable? Why? Are you thinking? Are you really thinking? Why wasn't it viable? Go ahead.
Because the rich people were being outnumbered by the poor.
That's a very important point A. Thank you. Thank you. You have to leave. Thank you. It wasn't viable because, as the gentleman says, poorer people had a higher birth rate. Poorer people had a higher birth rate, and write that down. Poorer people had a higher birth rate. And not only did poorer people have a higher birth rate, there are always more poorer people than wealthy people. Why else was the Federalist Party doomed? What else? Aside from the birth rate. Thank you. That's a valuable contribution. Aside from the birth rate, why else was the Federalist Party doomed? Point B, it was really not sensitive. The Federalist Party was not sensitive to the economic aspirations of lower class people. The Federalist Party was simply not sensitive to the economic aspirations of lower class people. The Federalist Party would be we're highly capitalized. Write that down. The Federalist Party were highly capitalized, whereas lower class people simply had nothing. You know, like most people born into the world, like me and probably like you. You're not born into the world with a great deal. You'll probably leave the world with a hell of a lot more than you have now. But when you were brought into the world, what did you really have? You know, one big yell, one big squawk, one scream, one cry. You came into the world naked, crying. You'll probably leave the world clothed and very quiet. You get the idea? They'll throw a blanket on you and that'll be the end of the whole damn thing. So the Federalists then had these, are you listening? The Federalists had these advantages. They had advantages that most people didn't have. The country, as we've said many times, was a poor man's country. Write that down. The country was very much a poor man's country. The country was very much a poor man's country. And as the size of the country expanded, as the territorial nature of the country grew, write that down, as the territorial nature of the country grew, as it expanded into the Ohio River Valley, and as it expanded as a result of the end of the War of 1812, as it expanded into the Ohio River Valley, and as it expanded because the British and the British Indian allies were I wouldn't say defeated, but at last were put at bay as a result of the War of 1812. In a sense, the floodgates were open, and Americans were slithering, if you will, into all the crevasses that made up the nation. So the country expands. Continue. In a sense, Jefferson was correct. In a sense, Jefferson was correct. Jefferson believed that only if there was this enormous domain could people get a stake in it. Write that down. Only if there is an enormous public domain, if there is land, if there is land enough, so to speak. Didn't he make a contribution with the Louisiana acquisition? Jefferson made this contribution with Louisiana, but in a sense, the country kept growing. So Jefferson's idea, here is where Jefferson proved to be correct. He may have been wrong in many other regards, but when it came to a very meaningful idea, the idea of opportunity, Jefferson seemed to be on the right path. That opportunity would mean land, and land would bring a degree of equality between people. Even if people were poor, if they had something, there is this egalitarian America where people are on a remarkably similar plane. Write that down. An egalitarian country. It is a kind of egalitarian. It's an egalitarian country. Get the idea? Jefferson's Democratic Republican Party became the dominant political party. Jefferson's Democratic Republican Party, the Democratic Republican Party, became the dominant political party. So dominant was it that by about 1816, write this down, by about 1816 through about 1824, there was essentially one political party in the country. From about 1816 to 1824, there's essentially one party. The Republican Party is the dominant political party. That period from 1816 to 1824, because there was this one dominant political party, without the acrimony, without the antagonisms that we witnessed between, let's say, Federalists and Jeffersonians, now that there's one party, there's a term often applied to that period, 1816 to 1824. It's often referred to, write this down, as the era of good feeling. it's often referred to as the era of good feeling because there wasn't this political acrimony. But as you well appreciate, things fade quick. Peace fades quickly, doesn't it? Particularly in politics. Peace fades very quickly. And so in 1824, when we witnessed that contested that contested presidential election, in 1824, when we witnessed that contested presidential election, that contested presidential election of 1824 would lead to something. It would lead to the fact that Henry Clay, a Republican, would, in a sense, determine that John Quincy Adams, a Republican, would become President of the United States. In this contested presidential election of 1824, Henry Clay, who I think we could say was the nominal leader of the Republican Party, write that down. Henry Clay, who's the nominal leader, the leader of the Republican Party, he throws his weight behind John Quincy Adams, and John Quincy Adams becomes president, and lo and behold, Henry Clay is named Secretary of State. At this particular time, Secretary of State was the position next in line to the presidency. The latter was you'd be president from being Secretary of State. The vice presidency was not within the natural ladder of succession to the presidency. And so what did people say about this decision when John Quincy Adams names Henry Clay Secretary of State? Go ahead, my friend.
They called it a corrupt law.
They said, this is corrupt. This is a dirty deal. A dirty deal. This is, as the gentleman correctly says, this was a corrupt bargain. It was a dirty deal. And who was this dirty deal aimed at denying? Go ahead. Andrew Jackson. Jackson looked upon himself as the victim. Jackson sees himself as a victim of a dirty deal, of a corrupt bargain. But a corrupt bargain among, in effect, whom? Good thick notes. A corrupt bargain involving all Republicans, including Jackson. Because Jackson saw himself as a Jeffersonian Republican. You see the dilemma here? Everybody sees themselves as a Republican in some shape or form. Henry Clay sees himself as a Republican. Jackson sees himself as a Republican. Everybody sees themselves as connected to whom? Right, to Jefferson, because Jefferson is the father of that Republican Party. So everybody sees themselves as connected to Jefferson. And they all see themselves as Republicans. But now something has happened. Now they hate one another. Write that down. Now they've reached that point in politics where they begin to despise one another. And as they begin to despise one another, we begin to see what we would call some political crystallization sets in. Some political crystallization. Write that down. There's a political crystallization that sets in. Meaning that there's going to be a firming up of political differences. Are you breathing? Now there's a firming up of political differences. There's going to be this firming up of political differences. Questions? Questions? Stop there for a moment. Observations from you. Go ahead.
With this transaction, when you're talking about not allowing Jackson in, right? Would that be associated?
No, Jackson was in. Not allowing him into the presidency?
Yes.
Not
wanting him to be president.
They didn't want, they didn't, Clay did not want him to be president. John Quincy Adams didn't want him to be president.
Right, but with this aggression
Yeah.
associated with that being related to what happened with Adams not wanting Jefferson to be president.
I wouldn't relate them. I wouldn't relate these individuals. I would say that Henry Clay did not want Jackson to be president because Henry Clay believed he deserved to be president. That's why he would run for the presidency, at least 4 times, and he never got there. He believed that he was the political leader of the Republican Party. After all, are you listening? After all, wasn't he the leader of the Warhawks in Congress? Wasn't he critical in the War of 1812? Henry Clay's from Kentucky. Henry Clay's from the West. Henry Clay he thought that he was the future. And all of a sudden, he thinks he's the future and something horrible happens. A military man comes along who is looked upon as heroic, as a kind of demigod. Is it easy to run against a demigod? Hi, my name is Richard Kleiman. I'm going to run for president. I've got one problem. The person I'm running against is a demigod. They all think he's terrific, and they think I'm caca. Is that a problem politically? Is it hard to run against somebody who is bigger than life? It is, isn't it? It's so hard to run against, it's so hard to be in politics and run against somebody who has some reputation. You think it was easy for Barack Obama to run against Hillary Clinton? Nobody knew who Barack Obama was. Look at the name, Barack Obama. That's an odd name politically. Hillary Clinton, you get the idea? There's a picture there. It was very difficult for Obama to run against Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. He often said, I don't know who I'm running against, him or her. But because he was so extraordinary, he took it on. He was extraordinary that he took it on and he prevailed. And Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State. There's a poetry to this, isn't there? It's like this is the opposite of the corrupt bargain. A corrupt bargain too. Do you follow me? How it's ironic. It's not easy to run against an individual who, for whatever reason, appears bigger than life. Will it be easy for someone to run against Barack Obama the next time? It'll be very difficult because he will only grow bigger and bigger. And if things work out, then he too will become mythical. If things don't work out, that's a whole different story. But if it works out, he becomes rather mythical. And so Henry Clay then thinks that he is giving the coup de grace to Jackson. He thinks he's blowing Jackson away. It's not so easy to blow a guy like Jackson away. Henry Clay didn't realize that. Henry Clay created, in a sense, his own monster because he gave Jackson not only a reason to live, but he gave Jackson a platform that he never got off of. Jackson simply became stupendous. And the significance of Jackson would endure long after Jackson had gone. Do you get the idea? Now I have to ask this question. Are you breathing? So I have to ask this question then. Who was this guy, Jackson? But before I ask the question, with your help, of course, who was this guy, Jackson, I have a question to ask you. Have you found in life that people very often quarrel over money? Is money a source of great disagreement? Is figuring out who's responsible for paying for something, is that often a problem? Is that a problem in your personal life? You go to eat, you go to dinner with somebody, you go to lunch with somebody, and all of a sudden they don't pick up the check. You know, people are cheap, a little slow in the draw. You know, a little slow when it comes to paying. Have you had that happen? Right? Have you had arguments with your mother, your father, a loved one, your boyfriend about who ought to pay for something? How about that? Ought to pay. Ought to pay is a landmine, isn't it? You ought to pay. No, you ought to pay. I ought not to pay. You ought to, I ought not to. Do you get the idea? When it comes to money and paying, is there a world of fire? Isn't there? That's exactly what we're going to see. We're going to witness that when it comes to deciding who should pay, politics and that idea of who's going to pay is going to become intertwined. Write this down. Politics is going to be intertwined with ideas associated with financial obligation. Politics is going to become intertwined with ideas associated with financial obligation. Okay? That's eventually where we're going to go. But before we go there, you have a question, my friend. Nice and loud, come on. Sure. Politics is going to intersect the issue of who's responsible for paying for stuff in America. Politics and paying. Politics and paying. What did Mayor Menino say today? He's going to lay off 600 people. Why? Because the governor's not giving them enough money. What's the governor say? The president's not going to give him enough money. What's the president say? He hasn't got enough money. Money? Does money rear its head? Does money force decisions? Money forces decisions, doesn't it? And money forces something else. Money forces a world of rationalizations. A world of rationalizations. A world of reasons why I should or why I should not pick up that bill. Get the idea? Politics and money, then, are going to intersect, as they often do. As they often do. Who is this guy, Jackson? Tell me a little bit about Jackson. Go ahead. Nice and loud.
A lousy entrepreneur.
Jackson has a history of financial failure. Write that down. Jackson will have a history of personal financial failure. He will be a military man. He'll be a politician. He will be a slave owner and a plantation owner. And he will have much financial turmoil in his life. I'm going to repeat that, aren't I? Jackson was a military man. He was a plantation owner. He's a slave owner. And he will have a life full of financial disaster. Lots of financial problems. I want to make two observations. Point A, a very important observation. Don't write, listen. Don't write, listen to this. Jackson was a slave owner. Jackson's from Tennessee. Jackson had no quarrel with slavery. He favored slavery. Jackson will do something politically that is very important for you to understand. Jackson will take the issue of slavery and move it to the back burner. Write that down. Jackson will move the issue of slavery to the back burner. And what will be on the front burner? On the front burner will be all of Jackson's issues that we'll discuss the next time we meet. But Jackson does something. Jackson takes the issue of slavery and, in a sense, removes it from a national debate or a national dialogue. From 1828 to 1836, from 1828 to 1836, the issue of slavery will be an issue that will not take the national stage. You listening? It'll be removed from the national stage. That's a very, very big deal. We will return to that idea at another time. Point B. Got to tell you this before I forget point B. Point B. Based on the gentleman's observation, that Jackson was not a successful businessman or was not financially adept, Jackson was what we would call a loco-foco. L-O-C-O-F-O. Got to be careful with this. Loco-foco. He's a loco-foco. Spell it, whatever the hell it is. Loco-foco. He's a loco-foco. A loco-foco was an individual who was afraid of paper money. Jackson was afraid of paper money. Jackson understood gold and silver. That he understood. Jackson believed in gold or silver, what we call hard money. But Jackson did not understand and was not sensitive to an economy that would be based on currencies. The implication being that he was rather primitive, financially speaking. Write that down. The implication is that Jackson was a little bit on the primitive side when it came to finance. The implication is that Jackson was a little primitive. Again, to verify the point that Jackson was not exactly adept in business practices. Okay? We made two very significant points that we will return to. Jackson and slavery. He moved slavery aside. And Jackson with money. Jackson will be a little primitive in regards to money. Other observations about Jackson. Go ahead.
He had a very controversial marriage.
Point number 2. You said it. Point number 2. Jackson and women will be a consistent issue which will manifest itself throughout his political life. Hold on. Jackson and women will be an interesting theme for you to be aware of. Jackson's relationship with women is very, very interesting. And it is very complex and psychologically intriguing. Help me a little bit. Let's develop this a bit. My friend, point A. Well, I don't know where you got that. Okay, I don't know where you found that because I don't think that's accurate. Go ahead.
He was all about honoring women, like.
He very much, when it came to women, Jackson had what we would call cavalier sentiments. Write that down. He was very cavalier in regards to women. You wouldn't have to ask Jackson to get off his seat on the bus. He'd be up giving you the seat. Jackson would throw his cloak in the water so that you could walk on his cloak. Jackson, if anything, as you suggest, if anything, Jackson was very enamored with women, and he saw women as vulnerable individuals who needed to be protected by gallant men such as himself. The opposite of your point. Do you follow me? Pardon me?
He said he liked women, but then the psychological part was that, like, they talked about how he didn't like, how he his, like, arm and stuff like that, like,
Well, hold on. You know, hold on. Maybe you're moving too fast. Let's go back. Let's get back to that at another time, okay? Right now, we're saying that Jackson was very, very cavalier with women, very supportive of women. More. Go ahead.
Probably had to do with the fact that his mom was ripped out of his life at a young age.
His mother. Uh-oh. There's your mother again. Do you follow me? Jackson and his mother. Tell me a bit more about his mother. Nice and loud today. Come on.
He was sick, she took care of him. As he was getting better, she went away to the prison to take care of her cousin. She died of smallpox.
Okay, but her mother, listen, you're missing something, right? What's he missing about his mother? Go ahead, pal.
I think she only saw him when he was sick. She filled him back, and then she left.
All right, okay, that's very interesting. We could talk about that. We could go, something else, go ahead.
His father wasn't around.
His, okay, there's definitely an absence of the father figure. There's definitely an absence of the father. What about the British soldier? Go ahead.
She made a deal to get Jackson and his brother out of the imprisonment with the British soldiers.
Right.
By taking care of the British soldiers.
This is what the young lady had said. But her, I beg your pardon? But her relationship with that British soldier, she had to, in a sense, do what with that British soldier? Go ahead.
Take him under her wing.
Yes, there was this vulnerability. His mother, Jackson's mother, in a sense, had to, write this down, had to co-opt a British soldier. She had to co-opt a British soldier. She had to, go ahead,
That's why
nice and loud.
he hated the British and he hated Indians because his father had to leave and died because they were moved from their land.
Yeah.
Because of the Indians, and then he hated the British because of his mother's death. Like that led them to let her to die. So when he fought in war, he basically had no mercy for Indians or the British.
Okay, so there is something. He certainly has a great deal of regard. I mean, there's more than regard here, isn't there? There is a degree of, ladies and gentlemen, are you thinking like a fox or like a pussycat? There's a great deal of intimacy. There's this intimacy that he feels and shares towards his mother. More in Jackson and women. More. Peter, go ahead, more. Nice and loud.
He wasn't loyal to any woman.
He wasn't,
He did whatever he wanted.
is that correct? Peter, is that correct? That's quite incorrect, okay? Go ahead. Now, come on, we're waiting for the big one. Come on.
He took some long trips when he wasn't even married to, I forget the lady's name, but he would truck out there to like prove her.
All right, well, you didn't take me for the big one. Go ahead.
On one hand, he was loyal and respectful of white women, but on the other hand, he would kill and disrespect black and Indian women.
Oh, all right. There is a definite issue there, isn't there? Let us return to the race thing another time. Aaron, you were next. Nice and loud.
He once fought a duel over his wife.
His wife,
Well,
Rachel, is a big deal. Young lady, right? Is Rachel big? Why is Rachel so important? Why? Listen, look at me. Put it right here. Why is Rachel so important? Hold on. Why is Rachel so important? Is Rachel vulnerable? Did we use vulnerable before? Put your hand down. Did we use vulnerable before? Is Rachel vulnerable? Why is Rachel so vulnerable? Go ahead.
She was married to another man, and Jackson, yeah, he felt like she wasn't treated right.
And the marriage between Rachel and her husband had dissipated, had become dysfunctional, except for the fact that it had been what? It had never legally, let us say, been recognized. So in effect, Jackson could be accused of something. He could be accused of something, and Rachel could be accused of something. What, Erin? Adultery. Rachel, his wife's accused of adultery, and he's accused of being married to someone who he legally can't be married to, since being married to two people is unacceptable at this particular time. I'm not sure it's ever acceptable, okay? You get the idea. And what about Rachel? What about Rachel's nature, according to Jackson? What about Rachel's nature? Go ahead.
She was energetic.
Very energetic. More. Go ahead.
She's very food sensitive, so whenever anyone attacked her, she would take it personally, and it would really hurt her. So in a sense, she kind of died because of it.
So in other words, you know people who have a big chip on their shoulder? You know people who are very vulnerable? I do. You know people who are very vulnerable, who walk around with a chip on their shoulder? In a lot of ways, the combination of both Rachel and her husband, of Rachel and Andrew then, was a disaster always in the making. You get the idea? It was, in a sense, a relationship that, out of necessity, would almost be doomed to break up. It couldn't be sustained. It couldn't be sustained because it was predicated on lots of agendas that are deeply, deeply complex and interpersonal. Do you follow me? Go ahead. Nice and loud, today.
I was going to say that they both have chips on their shoulders, both taken personal.
Very personal, both of them.
Clay, when he ran against Jackson, said something about Jackson's wife.
What did he say?
I can't remember exactly.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Something about how she married him when she was with the other guy, or something like that.
Okay. You're quite right. You're quite right. That both Jackson and his wife, in a sense, harbor an identity. Write this down. They both harbor an identity and resentments that they believe are held privately, but in effect become very public. They both harbor anxieties. Don't you want your anxieties to be private? Don't you prefer that your anxieties be private rather than public? Most people would prefer that. But in this case, their anxieties, both of their anxieties, became in effect very, very public. And as a result of their anxieties becoming public, this led to Jackson. How would you describe Jackson upon Rachel's death? Muhammad.
Felt really bad,
Give me a word that's not a sixth grade word, okay? He felt bad. That's great. Better. More probing. Go ahead.
He stood
Ooh. She said something interesting. Are you listening? She said something that was very interesting, didn't she? He didn't believe in the death. He was like, his sense of loyalty was greater than her death. Very interesting. Very interesting. Can you see that? Can you see how interesting that is? That he did not believe, in a sense, that she was dead. He waited for her to return. As though we're talking about something in Greek or Roman mythology. After all, he was a hero, as though he were a Greek and Roman mythological figure too, as opposed to being a man. Get that? Kind of interesting, isn't it? Observations from you. Go ahead.
Well, back to him being very loyal to women, he got upset because a woman he didn't even know got unreasonably searched when she was going to New Orleans.
Okay, and there will be other examples. There will be other examples when Jackson is president that he will step forward in regards to women. So Jackson is very we have, ladies and gentlemen, stop there for a second. We have not had a president prior to this who was as transparent in regards to his relationship with women. Write that down, that's good. We have not had a president who was as transparent in regards to his relationship with women. Go ahead. By transparent, I mean, we know more about Jackson and women than we probably know. We certainly know more about Jackson and women than we do about Jefferson and women. We have some ideas about Jefferson, but really not sure. We understand that Adams had a great relationship, a very wonderful relationship with Abigail Adams. We recognize that Martha and George Washington had a significant relationship. But they tend to be, are you listening? But our understanding of their relationships tend to be rather stagnant, if you will. Here we have what we would call a very interesting psychological portrait with lots of potential for interpretation. Jackson, from any psychological perspective you would wish to investigate this, it would be intriguing. One of you should write a book, a psychoanalytical history of Jackson. That would be intriguing, wouldn't it? More. Other ideas about Jackson. Go ahead.
He was extremely hot-tempered.
Well, why not? Write this down. Why not? Jackson had a very explosive temperament. Jackson had a very explosive temperament. And that when Jackson hated you, he hated you forever. There was no redemption with Jackson. He looked at things in rather absolute ways. Write that down, that's good. He looked at life, he looked at individuals in rather absolute ways. And so he does have this very, very fiery temperament. Tell me about his skin. Young lady. He always had a rash. Now listen, here is a guy, 6'1", who weighs 140 pounds. Will you think about that? Stand up. He's about 6'3". He probably weighs about 160 pounds. How am I doing?
185.
Sit down. Okay. Okay. But to be 6'1" and to weigh 140 pounds, you got to make sure he can catch you. We're going to miss you. You know, we gotta line you up, otherwise we're not going to see you. 6'1", 160 pounds, with a continual rash. Probably an autoimmune disease having to do with rosacea or eczema or some other autoimmune disease. Lots of people have autoimmune diseases. I do. I often come down with rosacea. You know, when allegedly people think you're a drunk, you get very ruddy in the face. You get very ruddy. You get if you're really not careful, you get a bulbous nose. Your nose grows. My nose grows anymore. It could be a problem for you. Do you know what I mean? So you got this ruddy complexion, and that's called rosacea. That's an autoimmune disease. And lots of people have rosacea, and lots of people have eczema, and lots of stuff like that. And what do we know about those autoimmune diseases? You can't shake them. You can't shake them. They're with you. Now, there are some things that can be done now, but you can't shake them. Go ahead. You're going to tell me something? No. Okay. And so you've got this guy with a fiery temperament, with this rash, who is a difficult quantity. Go ahead.
He had like crazy hair, and he also had a scar from his little British soldier struck him in the face. He had a scar, and he had like crazy hair.
You're right. He had a scar on his face and on his hand. So Jackson, and take it a step further. Take it a step further. What else is he carrying with him? Go ahead. Is this perfect or what? He's also carrying a bullet from a duel, a bullet that was never removed. And what were the words that he uttered when he had a duel? I forget now with whom he had this duel, when this individual fired first and fired at Jackson and hit Jackson. And Jackson, put your hand, go ahead.
It was Charles Dickinson.
Thank you. And Jackson, after having been hit, raised his gun and killed
Charles
Dickinson. And they said to Jackson at the time, "General, how did you do that?" And what did Jackson say?
Was it like just?
What did Jackson say?
He said it was just like
You
a
rest,
marble.
you rest, okay? What did Jackson say? Jackson said, "I would have killed that man if he had put that bullet in my brain." Hating a man, his fiery temperament, I would have killed that man if he had put that bullet in my head. You get the idea? How's this for a psychological case? Jackson is one wild, wild guy who becomes president of the United States. Hold on. Who becomes president of the United States and who brings with him this agenda that, in a sense, dominates America for almost 50 years. How's he doing? The next time we meet, we begin assessing the agenda. Do you follow me? That's where we're going. Now we're going to look at the issues associated with Jackson. And I want you to do this. I want you to pay attention in your reading to Henry Clay's American System. I want to know the pieces, write that down, the constituent parts of the American system. You're getting that down? The constituent parts of the American system. What made up the American system, and then how Jackson related to it. That's where we're going. Questions from you, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, sir.
You said Jackson put the slavery issue on the back burner.
Yes.
Wasn't one of his goals to make sure no slaves were running to Spanish Florida?
That was at an earlier time in his life, when Spain was in control of Florida. Go ahead.
Was it, when he made that really random army, was it freed slaves or runaway slaves that he?
It doesn't, no, it was runaway slaves. Other observation, we have some questions. Hold on. Go ahead. Nice and loud. Oh, thank you. I have questions for you. I'll give those to you in a minute. Go ahead, my friend. Who the hell knows, okay? Don't you love this kid? More questions. More questions. More substantive questions. Go ahead. We're talking about Jackson. God save me. Come on.
Did Jackson ever die from that bullet check?
No.
Weren't the bullets made of lead back then?
I don't know why he died. Go ahead. Everybody dies, okay? Everybody dies, whatever. Go ahead.
Where do we find out about Henry Clay's American system?
In Birkin, chapter 10. Birkin, chapter 10. More substantive questions, please. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm kind of confused.
She's confused. Let's go. Come on.
When I was reading the essay, so the controversy with the marriage is because the marriage with the first husband wasn't over?
Yes. In other words, she never officially got divorced. And because because the papers were never filed, she, in a sense, remained married to that fellow. And Jackson assumed that they both acted in good faith. They both believed that the marriage had officially ended. And when they discovered that the marriage had not ended, they were in the midst of a political scandal. You can appreciate that. How would it be if we discovered that, Bill Clinton was actually married to 3 people or 2 people? You'd say, well, I figured as much or whatever. Okay, but it could be a problem, couldn't it? If I decide to run for governor and they discover that I'm married to 3 people, could that be a problem? It could be a problem. More observations. Substantive. Go ahead, young. We're listening. Young lady, go ahead.
I was confused as well.
Nice and loud.
I was reading that he abolished the electoral college afterwards.
Yeah.
What happened before that upset him? Because I don't know what happened that.
In the contested election?
Yeah.
He had originally won the most electoral votes. He won 99 electoral votes in the 1824 election. And other people earned there were 2 other candidates who earned fewer than 99 votes. As a result of this, the Constitution then demands that the 3 top vote getters go to the House of Representatives where a vote is taken. Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And being the Speaker of the House, controlled by Republicans, he, in effect, could pick the president. And he did not pick the guy with the most votes. And that's when Jackson said, this is a dirty deal. Okay? Question. Nice and loud.
Wasn't divorce looked on as something that was not supposed to be done back then anyway?
The gentleman is making a very good point. The whole idea of religion, marriage, children, the sanctity of marriage tended to be ideas that people rhetorically accepted, believed, and held in high regard. In actuality, are you listening? If we examined the number of children born out of wedlock, I think that we and the people of that period would be shocked. But you know how are people hypocritical when it comes to marriage? Are people hypocritical when it comes to, let's say, sexual propriety? Is there a difference between sexual propriety and what people actually do? Yes. I think there's a big difference. And there was a difference then, too. Go ahead.
What kind of religion did...
We're talking about, these are overwhelmingly Protestant people of a fundamental nature. They are Baptist. They're Baptist. They're individuals who have a spirituality that is very emotive, very emotional. And they're deeply committed, deeply emotional to religion. Where religion is a significant quantity. After all, with people who have very, very humble lives, God is often, the whole idea of religion and God is very, very significant, is it not? Then and now. Not unusual. More observations. Quickly.
My full question was Jackson very religious?
Was he religious? I couldn't really answer that in an authoritative way. I don't exactly see Jackson as being religious. I see Jackson as being a little too egocentric to be religious. But I could be wrong. And the literature on Jackson is so huge that I'm sure that somebody would have a better answer than I have. I don't have a good answer for you. Go ahead.
Why Jackson moved the slavery on the side?
Why did he move it? Because Jackson believed in slavery. Jackson did not believe that slavery should be a political issue. This is ironic because look at what we said the other day about not only Nat Turner, but the Liberator and Garrison, and the whole idea of how slavery was being questioned. Get the idea? So Jackson, I suppose we could ask this question. Was Jackson enlightened in regards to slavery? And the answer would clearly be he was not enlightened. He was a symbol of the plantation society. He was a symbol of, he would see himself as, quote unquote, the good slave owner. He would represent the idea that the slave owner was a figure that the slave accepted. Get the idea? Totally different, as the gentleman points out, and thank you for correcting me, regarding our friend Garrison. Questions from you? Yes, sir?
How did he become a lawyer? Was this
Because anybody could be a lawyer, okay?
I was wondering about the education.
No, you simply worked in a law office. You became an intern. You went to work for a lawyer. You were an intern. You cucked around. You took the bar. You became a lawyer. You don't have to be smart. Don't get me started about lawyers today, okay? It was not a great obstacle. People read the law. They said they read the law, and in reading the law, they got to know the law. More questions in regards to this. This is endless, isn't it? And by the way, whenever we're talking about the psychology of an individual or money-related issues, it's as a, without Jackson, there is no modern presidency as we understand it. I didn't say this, but I should have. Don't forget, there's a lot of things that I say wrong, as you pointed out, and there's a lot of things that are left unsaid, but there's something that I should have said. Jackson would begin the Democratic Party. He would no longer be a Republican. Write that down. Jackson would become a Democrat. Jackson would begin the Democratic Party. I have a question for you. I have a question. This is a sample question, and Nancy, will you take those, send those down? Thank you.